She's done programs for the Department of Justice in several Midwestern cities as well. She grew up in St. Louis and is currently married with 4 children. She's on the board of at the Islamic Foundation of Greater St. Louis, and she is an interior designer by profession. Please welcome Miss Maysa Albarcha.
Hi, everyone. How are you? Lovely to see so many people. Okay, so today I'll be discussing the topic of Islam. And as she already introduced me, I'm Maysa Albarcha, and I've been doing this for about 18 years. And I've done many local churches, synagogues, universities, temples. You wouldn't believe how many places I've been in St. Louis. It's quite an honor to be able to see all these wonderful places and meet so many different types of religions and people, and even the ethical society. I've been there too. So I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of my lecture. I will also, try to make things as clear as possible. I know everyone comes from a different background, different understanding, but I do represent one of the Abrahamic traditions, so you'll see we have a lot in common as well. So um, let's start sharing my screen. I'm going to start with this PowerPoint. Okay, let's see here. So hopefully everyone can see it.
I
So,
can. I think
okay,
everyone
great.
can. Yeah.
So I always start out my lectures with peace, and Muslims say Assalamu alaikum, and other people would respond Wa alaikum assalam. And that's a traditional Muslim greeting. It's similar to Hebrew Shalom Lachem. And so, Arabic, and Hebrew are Semitic languages, and they have very similar words. So whenever you hear Arabic, you may recognize it if you speak, Hebrew or Aramaic, which very few people speak. There's actually one city in Syria where my ancestors come from. So my parents immigrated here from Syria in the 70s to, of course, get a residency, finish that up, and go back to Syria. Well, of course, when doctors find out how much they make in this country, they usually don't go back. um, so we stayed, and here I am. And I live about 2 miles from where I was born, just like regular St. Louisans do. And I live across the street from my parents too. So I picked up on all the St. Louis traditions. Okay, so we're going to talk about who is a Muslim, Muslim in the world, Muslim in the US, beliefs and practices, common misconceptions, and relations with other religions. So a Muslim is one who follows Islam. The word Muslim is basically silm, which means surrender or peace, and the mu. And in Arabic, mu is similar to er in English, so it becomes the one in that act. So it's not based on a person, place, or thing. It's based on an action to be in surrender. And so Muslim can be anybody from any race, ethnicity, nationality, language. And people have to be careful sometimes when they look at someone. You can't always tell that they're Muslim based on their skin color or where they are perceived to be from, because they do literally come in every color, race, hair type. So it's very difficult to tell who's Muslim and who's not. Muslims also believe all children before the age of puberty are automatically Muslim. What that means is that they automatically are surrendering their will to God, and they're learning from their environment and learning from their mistakes. So, up until the age of puberty, if they die, regardless of what religion their parents were, they go to heaven, and they're actually protected by Prophet Abraham until his or her parents come to pick them up, if their parents are going to heaven. If they're not, Abraham still has to babysit. So Prophet Abraham's rooting for the parents. He wants those kids to get picked up eventually in heaven. Okay. So Islam is the religion that we're learning about today. And what it means is really surrendering in order to follow God's guidance. And when I show you how we pray, if we get to that, you'll see that when Muslims pray, they put their hands up like this and they say Allahu Akbar, which means God is great. It's very similar to Hallelujah, which is Hebrew. And when you do that, it looks like you're surrendering, right? Like if you're being held up, you're like, okay, I surrender. And so we say Allahu Akbar and we surrender our intellect, which is right here, to our heart. So we put our hands over our heart. And when we do that in prayer, that's the closest we are to God during the day. And that surrender helps us realize our true nature, which is to be under God's guidance and follow his rules and regulations. And those are in the Quran, which is the holy book for Muslims, and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. The problem is that a lot of Muslims don't surrender and they have to struggle just like everyone else. And that's why you'll find so much conflict. Muslims believe their religion is perfect, but of course, Muslims are not perfect. That's common amongst all faiths. You know, the religion is good, but the people are not. And I've heard many converts who are like, if I had met Muslims and went to Muslim countries after, before I converted, I would have never converted. So you know, it's a difficult test from God when you meet people who practice a certain religion. Sometimes they're not upholding the faith, but that's what Islam means: is to follow guidance of God through surrendering. Okay. Um, it is the second largest religion in the world. There's 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide. This is a pretty recent population. Here are just some of the countries and some of the regions that have highly populated Muslims, Muslim region. One of the largest Muslim countries is not Saudi Arabia or the US. These are my two number one answers from high schoolers, believe it or not. Number one used to be the US. Right after 9/11, I did a lot of lectures up until about 2010. My number one answer was the US is the largest Muslim country. There was two reasons for that answer. Either the US is the only country they knew of, or because they heard about Islam in the news all the time, they thought somehow this country is full of them, when in fact it's not, obviously. But Indonesia is the largest Muslim country, and it's right here, if you all know where Indonesia is. And it has about 200 million Muslims, and Islam made it there through trade on the Silk Road. Muslims traveled there. They never conquested Indonesia. It was really through trade. And so today, you know, it is the largest Muslim country. Okay, here are some of the other ones. And the other large Muslim countries are North Africa, Southeast Asia. Here you have India, Pakistan have large populations of Muslims. In India, there's about 125 million Muslims, but don't forget they have over a billion people in India. In China, they have a sizable amount. Unfortunately, about a million of them right now are in concentration camps. God help them. I don't. There's nothing much we can do about it. We all buy Chinese products. Muslim populations. So if you look here, a lot of people assume, you know, most Muslims are Arabs, or all Muslims are Arabs, or any Arab they meet is a Muslim. So in fact, only 15% of the Muslims in the world are actually Arab. And just like Christianity and even Judaism started in the Middle East, started in, let's say, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, those areas, those are no longer the largest Christian countries. The same goes with the Arab world. You know, Islam started in Mecca, but Saudi Arabia is no longer the largest Muslim country. They moved elsewhere. So a lot of Arabs that you meet in the United States are actually Christian. They have a higher population than Muslim Arabs. And then around the world, Arabs only make up 15% of the Muslim world. So again, you know, you look at this little pie here, you see 85% non-Arab and 15% Arab. But all Muslims who are somewhat practicing speak a little Arabic, at least in their prayer. So that kind of unites them, that they're able to, you know, say Salaam alaikum. They know Allah, they can say Rahma, all these basic words. Just how many people who are more traditional Jews would be able to speak certain Hebrew words to each other, even though, you know, they don't speak Hebrew as their main language. But a lot of Muslims do speak somewhat, a little bit Arabic. Okay, so diversity among Muslims, they're a very diverse group of people, especially here in the US. You know, the US is really made up of Muslims who are given visas, basically. So, for instance, I don't meet a lot of Indonesian Muslims in the United States. For some reason, Indonesians aren't a large group that were given visas to come and live here. I do meet a lot of Pakistanis, there's Indians. Syrians, I've only met doctors up until a certain point when refugees started coming who are from less educated families. Usually the refugees were from farms or smaller villages and towns, and they didn't have higher educations. But most of the Syrians up until then were doctors or family members of doctors, only because that's the only Syrians who are given visas to come here and live or work. And so it just depends on who the government gives a visa to. That's really the diversity that's in the United States when it comes to Islam. And they come from different cultures. The family upbringing that a Muslim is in can really give you a different view on and perspective on things, how your family brought you up, your education, your political environment. If you came from a kingdom, a dictatorship, a democratic society, that all makes a big difference on how you behave here in the United States and your views. And then, of course, varying degrees of observance. We don't necessarily have orthodox, conservative, liberal, progressive per se in mosques, but people have those different views. Some people pick up on all aspects of Islam or are very devout. Others lax on certain aspects and don't want to practice it. Either they think it doesn't apply to them or they're not strong enough to uphold those things. So you have to really understand we have different varying degrees of Muslims. And you'll see in the next few slides, we have Muslims who are in Hollywood, and many of them have very lax views on observance. Okay, so many of the stereotypes about Muslims don't recognize our diversity and how we come from many different walks of life and different cultures and educations. And most of what you see from a Muslim is really their culture. Religion is something really private, and you probably don't see them pray or fast or give charity, but you see their cultural dress or how they eat or maybe how they behave, how they greet each other, how they raise their children. Some of that can be a big part of their culture. And it's much easier to follow your culture than it is your religion, because and there's a lot more pressure too, because culture, people around you, they're your peers and you answer to them every day. You see them. They can make fun of you, they can put you down. But when you follow religion, it's something that's really private and it's between you and God. And you don't see God, obviously, so you feel not as obligated to follow it many times versus your culture. And that's why Muslims sometimes choose culture over religion, and that can be a big problem. So let me go to the next slide. So here are some of the races in the United States. And of course, there's a lot of talk about race. And I've always, even before all these issues, have always thought we are one human race. Islam teaches us not to look at people's skin colors and ethnicities and languages, because that can change over time. People get mixed. People don't stay purebred forever, especially in countries like the US. And so, currently here are some of the races. Now, white Islam, Arabs are considered whites, or Iranis, and so are many other ethnicities. So that's kind of a skewed, I guess, outlook of what Muslims' racial ethnic composition is. But these are what categories were given in the United States. So, take it as face value. A lot of Muslims here are citizens. About 82% are citizens. The rest are either here on a visa or some work visa or green card. There's very few illegal Muslim immigrants, because they have to get on a plane to get here and go through airports and things like that. So it makes it very difficult, unless they overstay their visas, I guess. 42% were born in the United States, like myself. When I was growing up, I was one of the very few, I guess, Syrian women who were born here. Everybody who was older than me was born in Syria. So for my group, I'm about 45 years old. So, I didn't meet any. And there were some, a lot of them were Christians that came here in the late 1800s and so on. But, up until the 1965, 75, that's when a lot of the Arabs started coming to the United States. Okay. So, history of Muslims in America. Well, early on, a lot of the slaves who were brought here were Muslim. About 20% of them were enslaved from Africa. And of course, it's complicated how they got here. A lot of times, the tribes in Africa would steal other tribe members and then sell them to the Europeans. And the Europeans would take them to islands and then trade them and bring them to the US. So a lot of them were from Muslim tribes. And none of them kept their religions. Obviously, they had their religions changed by by the owners. And later, from the 1960s and on, many Muslim students came here on visas and so on. And many African Americans became Muslim once they just rediscovered their roots, such as Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali. And actually, the Nation of Islam started in the 1940s, but it really built up into the 1960s. And they took on some Islamic traditions along with a lot of other racial issues and civil rights issues. So they weren't full-fledged Muslims. I mean, most mainstream Muslims didn't consider them Muslims, and they still don't today. But when their main leader, Elijah Warithuddin Muhammad, became mainstream Muslim, a lot of the followers became mainstream as well. So we had like 1 million people come into mainstream Islam. And that was around the time Malcolm X also converted into mainstream Islam and left behind the nation. Today, the nation has about 100,000 followers, I would say, in the United States. I've met many former Nation of Islam Muslims. Okay, so here are some famous Muslims. Again, they have a varying degree of religiosity. Some are very religious, some are not, some are just Muslim by name. Nevertheless, they're Muslim. I mean, if you claim you're Muslim and you believe in God and Muhammad is the last messenger, then you're Muslim. So you may be surprised to see some of these people, and maybe you're not. Um, I won't have to name them. I think the ones that are recognizable. My shocker was like I think 10 years ago I realized Dr. Oz was Muslim. He's Turkish, so most Turks are Muslim, and his name is Mehmet, which is another name for Ahmed in Turkish. So yeah, it was quite an eye opener. And here's some people in academia. Most of you don't know these people. My favorite scholar from all of these is Hamza Yusuf. He's very well educated. He runs a university in Berkeley, California, Zaytuna, and I listen to a lot of his lectures. He's very well versed. And these are former people from the Obama administration, so none of these still exist except perhaps Ilhan Omar. And people, for instance, view Muslims in Congress like Ilhan Omar or Rashid Tlaib or anybody else who may be in Congress or in general in government as representing all Muslims. They don't. I mean, I don't necessarily like her. She doesn't represent me. She has a shady history about her own, you know, whatever lifestyle. So it bothers me when people assume that these people represent every Muslim. They don't. She may be calling herself a Muslim, but she doesn't represent me. So it becomes a little bit troublesome when I have to like defend. And she wears a headscarf, fine. I mean, she decided to wear a headscarf, but doesn't mean she wears it for the same reasons I do or whatever. So it's kind of frustrating. Just like not every Christian or Jewish person in Congress represents every Jewish or Christian person in the United States, right? They have their own views. There's very liberal ones, very conservative ones, and so on. So it's different. Okay, so here are the basics of Islam. We're going to talk about that. Islam teaches the cultivation of excellent moral character to better oneself in the world. And just like other faiths, this is an integral part of our religion. And you don't hear this much. Maybe more recently we do, because now the news, mainstream media is trying to pander to Muslims very much. They realize our vote matters, and so now the media panders to us. I don't trust their intentions, but yet they pander. So they speak more about us in more favorable terms, I guess, if you want to say. But these are the things we really emphasize: respect for the earth and all creation, care and compassion, the importance of seeking knowledge, and honesty and truthfulness in word and deed. And so we're going to talk about what we believe, how we practice, and what our goals are. So one of the major beliefs are God, the angels, the prophets, the holy books, the afterlife, and God's will. Okay. So God in Arabic is Allah, and it is the Arabic word for God, just like Allah is Aramaic, Elohim is Hebrew, Dios is Spanish, and Gott is German. And so when we say Allah, it can only refer to the God of Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, Abraham, David, Solomon. We can't use that word for any other God. Unlike the word God in English, which can be used for anything, right? I just watched Hercules with my son the other day, and they used the word God like 1,000 times in the show, but it was referring to Zeus and all the other gods that the Romans used to worship. So Allah wouldn't be used in that term. You could say ilahat, which is a different word for any god, but Allah is his formal name. And we don't have an image of God or a picture. We believe he is made of light, a light we don't understand. My son, who's 9 years old, is very religious in his own way, and he always discussed God with me. And he's like, if we were created and then God created us, who created him? And I said, the fact that you can't understand that someone or something can be not created proves that you're created, because your mind is limited. You can't think past that, because it hurt his brain to think someone's always there. There's nothing that created him. And so I told him, I came to realization that's how you know you're created, because you can't think past it. You have a limit. It's like a computer has a limit, right? We made it that way. So Allah for us is one. He has no partner, no son, no one who shares in his divinity. We go directly to God for worship. We don't worship anything in between. Prophet Muhammad was a teacher, a rightly guided human being who taught Muslims how to live a righteous life, but we definitely don't worship him and we don't ask him for anything. He died. And so, when we die and go to heaven, we may see him, just like we may see other prophets, but we don't worship him. And that's a big part of Islam, to have a direct contact with God at all times and not to go through any intercessors. Okay. Monotheism is a belief in one God. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all part of the Abrahamic traditions. Through Abraham, we believe there was a son named Isaac who had many children who were all prophets, great prophets of Islam. And the last prophet being Jesus, who was the final prophet from the line of Isaac. And through Ishmael came many descendants who ended with Prophet Muhammad, who was the only prophet from that line. And he was from the Arab tribes. And so Muslims' view is that all the prophets that came from Isaac were specific for those tribes and for those people, while Muhammad, who came to the Arabs, was a religion that was meant for all of mankind. And it came to the Arabs because they were caravan leaders in 7th century Arabia, and they were a perfect vehicle for distributing this religion because they were the truck drivers of that time. So they were able to travel throughout the world and distribute their religion. Plus, they had an art of oral history. Their one thing was poetry, memorizing oral history, memorizing their genealogy. This was their art. This was their entertainment. This was their form of expression, not drawing pictures or necessarily even making idols. If anyone's ever seen idols from that century, they're so ugly, not talented at all. In Saudi Arabia, they just started doing archaeology and they're digging up things, and some of the ugliest idols I've ever seen. Just not talented at crafting idols, but they were super talented at poetry. Their poetry from that era was amazing. My dad's a big poet, and he always tells me all this poetry he's memorized. And Arabs still love poetry. You know how we have America's Got Talent? They have Arabs Got Talent, but they also have poetry shows still in the Middle East where they go on TV and they compete in poetry. Okay, so Islam came as a religion that promoted a book that was very poetic. The Quran is very poetic and it rhymes. Okay, so we do unite with the other faiths in the sense that we believe them to be true faiths from God in their original form. Muslims do believe that the holy books today and the religions of the Abrahamic tradition have been corrupted by time, translations, and editings, and so on. But much of it is still intact. So Muslims don't try to disrespect other people's religions, such as Christianity and Judaism, because they are still part of God's Abrahamic traditions. And if you go through some of the thicker Qurans we even have excerpts from the Old Testament to finish some of the stories that we have, because there's more details in the Old Testament on the story of Moses or on the story of Joseph. It's quite fascinating if you read it. Okay, so angels were a creation from God. And I was just reading yesterday in a book. I mean, Gabriel in the Quran is mentioned as the Holy Spirit, literally, Ar-Ruh al-Quds. But it means that it was God's favorite angel who he sent to all of his prophets to speak to them on his behalf. I think Moses was the only prophet in the Quran that actually got to speak to God directly. The rest all went through Gabriel. And so he's God's Holy Spirit, but we don't believe in any kind of Trinity or that he's shares any power with God. Muslims believe God has the ultimate power and he gives miracles to whom he wishes, but it's all in his hands. Okay. Michael, is the angel that guards the doors of hellfire. I was reading yesterday that he's never smiled in his life. And because, he gets to see everybody burn in hell, and that's not a very happy, joyous event. So he's never smiled in his life. And Raphael, which is Israfil, blows the horn at the end of time. We also have another angel. I don't know why it's not mentioned here. Israel. It has nothing to do with the state of Israel. It sounds similar, but it's not spelled the same in Arabic. And he's the angel of death. So he takes people's souls when they die. And everybody meets him. So I guess the Grim Reaper. And there's millions of other angels. When Muslims, we believe when someone is conceived, at the time of when the soul enters the body of a child. So at around 6 weeks, and some scholars say 120 days, which is 4 months, a baby receives a soul, and two angels bring it. And from that time on, those two angels are with that soul until that soul is born, lives out their life, and then dies. So those are your two angels. They're with you on your shoulders. I think that's where a lot of cartoon people have gotten those angel and devil thing. And we're the only religion who really has this. But they're not a devil and an angel. They're both angels. One writes all your good deeds and one writes all your bad deeds. And then they come on the day of judgment as witnesses for and against you. The same way that we have the witness system in this world, we set up the same justice system we instinctively have from the hereafter. So those angels are with us. And as children, they protect you. Okay. And when we die, they go back to heaven and they are with the other angels. There's millions and millions and millions of angels. But the main ones are the ones I spoke to you about earlier, like Gabriel, Michael, Raphael, and so on. So in Islam, we believe God only should be worshipped, and the messengers taught this throughout their lives. This is what they taught. Some of them were very successful, most of them failed miserably because people are stubborn. They don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be told the way that they're living is, not righteous. They want to make money. They want to make themselves happy. And so, it's very difficult for prophets. I mean, even today, when you hear people telling you to do good things, people don't listen to them. They rebel, they make fun of them, and so on. So, they also said treat others as you would like to be treated. And most people want to be treated well. Hopefully, that you love yourself enough to be treated well. And so, if you follow your prophets, that's all they taught. I mean, here's some of the common prophets we share: Adam, Noah, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac. Of course, the Arabs named their children the same names. My son's name is Ibrahim, which is how Abraham's mom and dad called him. Isaac is Ishaq, Jacob is Yaqub, Joseph is Yusuf, Moses is Musa. So these are all Latinized versions of these names. And Jonah is Yunus. Jesus is Isa or Yeshua. And then Muhammad is the same, Muhammad. Okay. We have all these stories in the Quran as well. The only difference is, and I've read the Old Testament and the New Testament, is that we don't attribute any sin to these prophets. Some of them were tempted with sin, but none of them committed the sin. They were corrected and they didn't commit the sin. So for us, prophets are righteous and they're the perfect people, or at least the most perfect people amongst their tribes. And they all came to people that they were from, except for Prophet Lot. He was Abraham's nephew, and he was the only prophet that was sent to people he was not from. And he failed miserably as well. Okay, so Muhammad was born about 600 years after Jesus. He was born in Mecca to a time when people no longer worshipped one God. Abraham had originally settled his son Ishmael and his wife Hagar in Mecca, and they formed a society there. He later came and dedicated this cube shaped building to the worship of one God as a representation of God's abode in heaven and the four corners of the earth. And that's why it was kind of square. God ordered him to build it, just like God ordered Noah to build the ark. And he taught the people the rituals of pilgrimage and how to go to pilgrimage and so on. And they did it for thousands of years. Later on, some of the Arabs in that area, the tribes, brought back some idols from the Roman Empire. They went to Syria and they worshipped idols there at that time during the Roman Empire. And they figured that maybe these will help us get more riches and our country will be better and prettier, just like Syria is. And they didn't realize climate makes a big difference. Syria's climate is quite different than Mecca. And they continued to bring more and more idols, and then it became a hub of idol worship. And they no longer believed in the afterlife, but they believed that their prayers and worship of idols only brought them good in this world, and there was nothing after. So if you wanted babies, if you wanted riches, you worshiped this idol or that idol, and it brought you what you needed in this world, but there was no accountability in the hereafter. And Muhammad was born into this world, but he didn't agree with it. He was instinctively a good person who was on his fitra, which in Arabic is his nature. So by the time he was 40, he had started to become aware that he was receiving revelation through Angel Gabriel in a mountain where he used to go and meditate. And his wife, Khadija, who was, by the way, 15 years older than him, and she proposed to him. She broke every taboo there is today. She was much older, and she proposed to him in a very respectful manner. And he loved her very much. And she was the first to believe in him. She told him, I always knew you had something special about you, and I know that God is, wanting you as his prophet. And she supported him throughout his life until she died. And then he migrates to Abyssinia. He sends some Muslims to migrate to Abyssinia to protect them from some of the um, abuse that he received in Mecca, because he was abused just like every other prophet. They didn't want to listen to him. They told him he's a liar, he's a magician. They accused him of all types of things. And he had the slaves, he had the women, the people who were mistreated all follow him. And eventually he moved to Medina where he started his first Islamic state. And after that, he went back to Mecca and conquered Mecca. And he conquered it in a way that's unheard of in the 7th century by not killing anyone, forgiving everyone who had hurt him and his people. And eventually, most of the people of Mecca had become Muslim on their own because of that, because they realized he wasn't such a threat. And their livelihoods were not threatened either, because he didn't come in and take all their money. He told them, you can stay in your positions. Now we're just going to make this a hub of worship of God and not the worship of idols. Okay. Later, he dies and he's buried in Medina, and Islam spreads to the world through missionary work, through trade, and through conquests. Okay. So that's basically a summed up history of Islam in 5 minutes. Of course, it's really a lot more complicated, but there's no time for that. You would have to read books. Okay, so some of the Abrahamic holy books. Muslims believe Abraham received the scrolls, and the Torah was given to Moses, the Psalms to David, the Gospel to Jesus, and then the Quran to Muhammad. We believe in all those holy books in their original form, word for word, as they were revealed to the prophets. And Muslims would say that they believe the Quran is the only book that's still intact because it's in Arabic, which is a live language, and that people have memorized it by heart by the millions. It's the world's most memorized book. Therefore, even if they had killed all the scholars of Islam, they would still have it preserved. I've memorized about 30 chapters. There's 114. And it's fairly easy to memorize, especially if you listen to it over and over again. The Quran means the recitation. There's about 6,000 verses. They're all in Arabic. There are many translations. One of my favorites is this one. I love I forgot, is it Marmaduke Pickett Hall, or is it Pickett Hall? It's hard to say his name. It's, I think, out of print, but this is my favorite translation of the Quran because in English it's very clear, very easy. And this is a revised, edited edition, so it gets rid of some of the old English and it makes it more modern English. But there's probably 18, 20 translations of the Quran. But anybody can learn Arabic and understand the original. And I do know Arabic, thank God, and I understand the original, but I do like the English as well. It gives a different perspective. And so when we memorize it, we do so throughout our life. Every Muslim memorizes a little bit so they can pray, but mostly people memorize a few chapters, at least 20, 30. The short chapters are easier to memorize than the long ones, obviously. There's chapters that are like 289 verses, and there's chapters that are 3 verses long. And it ranges from chapters that were revealed in Mecca and chapters that were revealed in Medina. And the Mecca ones were all about faith, the heaven, hell, why we're here on earth, why we're here to worship God, why worshiping God is important because otherwise we worship ourselves. And then the Medina ones are more about rules and regulations. So the Sharia of Islam, like inheritance, marriage, divorce, how to dress, how to eat, all the different rules of Islam, the more detailed rules are in the Medina ones. So you kind of have to realize it was revealed over 23 years, and most of the revelations were in Mecca. The Medina ones are much longer, longer verses. Okay. And of course, the revelations came to the Prophet Muhammad through Angel Gabriel in certain situations throughout his life. He lived anywhere between 30,000 to 100,000 people around him. So they had the same problems, same situations that we would have in any time, whether it's 7th century or 21st century. We have the same issues. We have marriages, divorces, wars. Um, we have peacetime. We have situations with people of other faiths. So all these revelations were to show us how to behave in all these situations. And the Prophet Muhammad played all the roles that you can possibly play as a human being. He was a teacher, a father, a husband, a minister, a military leader. He was a son, okay, and he was a best friend. So he played every role you could possibly play. So we could look upon him to say, okay, in this situation, this is what we do. And some of the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad are here. These are called hadith. So he interpreted the Quran for us. So when people read the Quran, they're like, this is what it says. Well, what's the interpretation? What's the context? And most Muslims know. But when non-Muslims go and look through the book and especially in English, which has many different interpretations, unlike Arabic, people make up their own interpretations. And the Prophet Muhammad and God said that people, actually, God says, people with a disease in their heart will take an allegorical meaning of something and turn it into something that's, set in stone. And then they would go to the set in stone meaning and make it allegorical because they want to make it suit their needs. Okay? So it's very, very scary when people do that. Um, and some of the traditions you can read here. I won't read all of them. But one of the things that we are very much encouraged in Islam is to seek knowledge. And that's why Muslims were pioneers in science and math and botany and chemistry and astronomy, because they were always encouraged to seek knowledge and that it was never against God. Um, there's a whole chapter, a Rahman, and it talks about all the miracles of God and how they're all signs of his existence, and how we're told to go look and seek and learn so we can see how beautiful his existence is and how beautiful his creation is. So, learning about science and astronomy and all the things that we learn about don't eliminate God from the picture. If anything, it encourages it. Now, of course, when it comes to evolution, Muslims don't believe they come from apes. We do believe we were created by God from Adam, and we are ancestors of Adam and Eve, which is a uniting factor for all of mankind. Every one of us is a distant cousin of every one of us. So, whether you believe in, you know, I believe in what do you call it? Uh, the survival of the fittest and natural selection. But evolution, no, I don't buy it. That's just me. But of course, I definitely don't believe we're from apes. God makes it very clear that we are from mankind. Okay. Afterlife, Muslims, this is our goal. I mean, we do believe in a hell and a heaven. Hell is described very, very detailed in the Quran, and heaven is very detailed. And anytime God mentions heaven, he mentions hell. We do believe there's a day of judgment. We will meet God. We will be held accountable for all our actions and deeds. Um, and God is all forgiving, very merciful, and that's one of his names. But at the same time, any action that we do that we don't ask for repentance, there is a chance that we will be punished for. So it's a very balanced perspective in the sense that we aren't guaranteed heaven and we're not guaranteed hell. We live our life as best as we can, and only God knows how much we tried and how much we made an effort and what abilities we were given and what resources we were given and how well we used them, and then what our beliefs were. But every single part of our life, whether it be how we got here into the womb, what was there before we were here, what happens to us in the grave, what happens to us on the day of judgment. It is literally so detailed in the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran that we can make a movie, like a really good sci-fi movie. People will all want to watch it, but no one's daring to do that because there's some, there's always these extreme Muslims who are like, "Why'd you do that? That's not allowed," and you don't want to get in trouble. But it's actually pretty awesome if you get into all the details. It would make for a really good script. But I don't go through life feeling like I'm doomed to hell. Definitely. I feel that I'm doing my best to be a good person, a good Muslim. I make mistakes. I get up. I try again. I repent. My prayers, my fasting, my charity all help me achieve that form of repentance. But if you're a truly evil person, you know it when you get up in the morning. You know you're not good. You know you're evil. Um, okay. I was reading the other day about Satanists and what they worship, and they worship themselves. So that's basically, they don't worship Satan. They say they worship themselves. That's pretty scary. um, so God's will. We believe that God knows everything. And that he knows what would happen in the past, what happens in the future, what all the outcomes of every scenario may be, but we don't know that. So he actually blessed us by not telling us the future, not telling us when we're going to die, because we believe if we woke up and we knew exactly the day we're going to die, we would live such miserable lives. The reason that we go on living every day is that God gave us hope. And this hope that we have inside us, for some reason, makes us feel like we're going to live forever, even though we know we're not. No one lives forever. We all going to die. And, but yet, we feel that way. You could be a 99-year-old person. I mean, Beverly Clearly, I think the lady who wrote all those Ramona books, she's 104 when she died. She was still writing and active. She looked like she's 70. She's literally so young looking. And, she was a happy woman. But she knew she was going to die any day. I mean, at 104, your chances are slim. that you're going to wake up to see tomorrow, right? But this is God's will. And so Muslims live knowing that God has a plan, He has a will. And these are the five, pillars of Islam, the shahadas of salah, zakat, saum, hajj. The first one is La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah. This is a tradition that we say when children are born into this world. It's kind of like their baptism. If they don't get it recited in their ear, they're still Muslim. It's just a tradition. Usually the father takes the child and recites it in their ear. It's also how a person becomes Muslim. So when someone comes to the mosque and they want to convert, we tell them to recite this and they have to believe it. And they have to believe in all the prophets that came before Muhammad as well. So if they had believed in Jesus or Moses or David or Solomon, they still believe in him. And then they just add Muhammad to the fold. And so that, and then they become a Muslim. That's all it takes. Daily prayers, we do this 5 times a day based on the sun's movement in the sky. We have one from dawn to sunrise. That's our first prayer. The next one is from noon to about 3 o'clock on a sundial. No one uses sundials. It's just that when you look at the sun in the sky, it's about 3 o'clock and you know that your noon prayer is over. And of course, it changes throughout the year, right? So from 3 o'clock to afternoon, from afternoon to sunset is the next one. So from 3 to sunset is your next prayer. And then from sunset to about an hour and a half when it gets really dark is your next prayer. And then the fifth prayer is from that hour and a half after sunset till the next dawn. And in Islam, just as in the Jewish tradition, the day actually begins at sunset. But of course, we live in this world. It's hard to tell someone my day just started and it's sunset. So, um, that's kind of how it works. But these are our 5 daily prayers. Okay. And we're obligated to do them, men and women. Women don't need to do them when they're menstruating. It's no longer an obligation. We can pray any other way we want. We can call on God any other way. We just are not obligated to stand in prayer and do the physical acts of prayer that men do. And so that is a blessing from God for many women. And because everybody goes through different ministrations and different types of, especially in the old days. Today we have medicine, we have things, but in the old days it wasn't as easy as it is today. And so Islam is for everyone, for every time. So during the ministration, we don't do the 5 daily prayers. But I can still go to the mosque. I go to Friday prayer. I just listen to the prayer. I don't pray with them. Okay. So here are the 5 daily prayers. And when you see people pray, they stand, they bow, and they prostrate. It's very similar to how traditional Jews, like Sephardic Jews, they still pray like that. They bow and they prostrate. All the prophets used to bow and prostrate to God. People did change how they approach God over time. But each of those positions is a position of your heart versus your intellect. So standing up, your heart is below your intellect. Bowing, you're getting closer to God by putting your intellect and your heart on the same plane. And then when you prostrate, your heart is above your intellect and you've submitted your will to God. Because your will is all here. And later science proved that all your thoughts are in the frontal lobes. But in the Quran, God says He grabs you by your frontal lobes on the day of judgment to face judgment, because this is where all your lusts, your wants, your needs, your thoughts were. And your heart is where your conscience is. So you have to kind of balance it throughout your life and not blacken your heart with sin. So the mosque is a place that we worship. You can come and congregate in the mosque. You don't have to be at the mosque to be a good Muslim. Only for men, Friday is an obligation. They have to listen to a sermon and pray. It takes about 30, 40 minutes at the most. Women are obligated. We are recommended to go. We do go, but they're not obligated, which is also a blessing because then I don't have to drag my kids and go there, especially when they were young. I never brought my son to the mosque when he was young. I didn't want to disturb other people, and I couldn't focus. And but I do go now that he's older. I bring him, and he goes to school at the mosque anyway. So required donation is 2.5% of what we've saved. So it's not Uncle Sam. We don't give from our income. We come from the savings. So hoarding is against religion in Islam. It's against our religion, as is interest. So Muslims don't pay interest. We try not to, but we definitely don't take it. God said if I had allowed interest, then people would don't do no good for each other. So if you lend someone money, you get the same amount back, whether it's 10 years, 20 years from now. You can only make money off of trade. You can't make money off of money in Islam. It's called usury. People changed the word to interest to make it sound good, but originally it's called usury. And it's a very big sin in Islam. But the whole world deals with interest now, and it's not very good for the economy. But that's a whole nother topic. But we do give 2.5% of our savings. So if you've saved more than what you've used for one whole year, you add that up and you give it to the poor. You can give it to a poor person, a poor family member, a charity. It's between you and God. You don't have to tell anyone what you did, basically. So the only people you can't give it to as a male, as a female, you can give it to anyone. But as a male, you can't give it to your wife, your children, your mother and father, and any unmarried sisters who are orphaned. Because in Islam, as a male, you are required to be the breadwinner. Women can make money and share in the expenses of the family, but they're not required religiously to be the breadwinner of the family. Men are. So men have to support their wife, they have to support their children, their mother and father if they need it, and they have to support any unwed sisters who are orphaned, who don't have a father, if they want the support. They don't have to, but if they want to, they have to support them. So you can't give it to them in charity. That's your obligation. You can't consider that charity. But anybody else, you can give it to. My husband supports his sister in Syria. They're having very bad economic times, so he sends her money. She helped him through medical school, through his residency here in the US. She sent every penny she had to him. She was a teacher in Saudi Arabia, and her husband didn't make that much. So everything she made, she gave to my husband to help him pay for rent and all the things he needed. And so he supports her for the rest of his life. And I told him even if he dies, I would still support his sister because she's the reason why he's here. And she was, very selfless. And it's not considered charity. It is considered charity because she is married and she has an income, but he helps her nevertheless. Okay. And we help other organizations as well. But the money does not go towards the mosque. You can't run a mosque with a charity. The mosque has its own fund that you can start. And most mosques in the Middle East are built with something that supports them. So you build a mosque and you build a business for it, and then the business makes income for the mosque. So you don't constantly have to ask people for money. But here in the US, people do get money for the mosques. I mean, our mosque costs about $50,000 a month to run. It's all from donations. But we don't have a required donation that you have to give. Our membership fee is literally $100 a month, a year, to be a member at the mosque. But people donate from their own goodwill to keep the mosque running. Fasting is coming up April 14th, about 14th, 15th, depending on the moon. We follow a lunar calendar. And it will be from dawn to sunset every day. We don't eat, drink, or have marital relations during the day. And that includes water, coffee, gum, nothing in our mouth. Now, thankfully, we wear masks all day, so you don't have to smell any Muslim's bad breath. But my husband, he's like, really, that's great that we wear masks now at work because, no one can smell my bad breath. But at sunset, we eat and drink and be merry. And that helps us learn self control for a whole month. I mean, humans are out of control for 12 months. So God says, 1 month, I want you to learn self control. Deny yourself the most valuable thing, which is food, drink, and relations with your wife or husband, and learn some self control. And then at night, go back to eating and praying. And there's a lot more charity that month. We pray at the mosque. We read the Quran in its entirety. A lot of people get together for dinners, maybe not this year. But last year was great. The mosque was closed. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but it gets stressful. Find a parking spot, go to the mosque, pray, listen to children crying in the back. Last year we just stayed at home, we prayed. It was really spiritual. We didn't have to go through all that stress, and you didn't feel obligated that you missed it. You don't have to go, but you don't feel like you missed anything because it was closed. This year we're going to have it open, but it's much shorter. They're going to shorten the prayers and things like that so that we don't stay there very long. Okay? Pilgrimage, these are 3 million people. This is the population of St. Louis that you see in this picture. So St. Louis metropolitan is 2.8 million. And last year Hajj was canceled. This year they're going to have Hajj for only people who are vaccinated. But it's really a commemoration of Abraham and his family. All the rituals that we do there, the trials, everything is a commemoration to Abraham. And it's like a renewal of a Muslim. Once you go to Hajj, you are come back as a new Muslim. You are clean of all sins. You can start over again. Some people go when they're older, some when they're younger. In the United States, you can go anytime you want, but if you live in other Muslim countries that are very populated, the Saudi government only gives you a visa if you're 40 or above because they can't let everyone go. There's 1.8 billion Muslims. The US, maybe they get 10,000 a year that go, but if you're in Indonesia, like 40,000 people want to go or 100,000. So there's limits. I haven't gone yet, and now that I've chosen to go, it's in the middle of August, so I don't know if I'm going to go now. My husband went when it was in December because it's a lunar calendar, so it goes back 11 days on a solar calendar. So in about 10 years, it'll be in December. I'll be 60, maybe, I'll be 55. I'll go then when it's much cooler. I don't want to go when it's 120 degrees. Even though they've made it very nice and it's cool there, they like air conditioned the floor somehow. But still, it's quite an experience. You get to be with people from different races and cultures and ethnicities and social and educational backgrounds, and you really have to learn how to be patient and get along with everyone for 2 weeks in this situation. It teaches you about the humanity that God created and how different, and at the same time how similar we are. It gets you out of your comfort zone. If you live in a nice house in West County, this is going to get you out of your comfort zone. So here's the Mecca, here's the Kaaba. We don't worship that building. I know it looks like we do, but we go around it, and we go around it 7 times for one of the rituals, just like the angels go around God's throne in heaven 7 times every day and praise and worship Him. So it's an angelic action that we do. And 7 is very important in all the Abrahamic traditions. But when you see people bowing, they bow it in the direction of Mecca. I always wonder if people start living on Mars, what direction are they going to pray? I guess they have to pray towards Earth. It's kind of confusing. But we do directions, and so our direction is in St. Louis is northeast. It's the shortest route to Mecca. I mean, the Earth is round. You can actually pray in any direction, but you go the shortest route. And so we believe Ishmael and Abraham built that building together. It's underneath is just brick. It's just like a brick building. There's no idols in it or above it. We don't worship any kind of images. We have 2 holidays, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. One is after Ramadan when it's over, and one is after Hajj. And we celebrate with the kids. It's mostly for the kids. We give them gifts and mostly money. And then they visit family. We dress up. We have special foods. Every culture has their own foods and activities. And it's just a time of celebration. And then faith in action. We both believe that cultivating one's relationship with God, the positive behavior with others. Ihsan is excellence in character. Actually, our reason for being here on earth is to build our character and have a spiritual relationship with God. And if everyone just follows those golden rules in all religions, in Islam, it's none of you are real believers until you wish for others what you wish for yourself. In Judaism, the shall love their neighbor as thyself. Christianity, treat others as you would like them to treat you, and so on. And then misconceptions. I'm not going to get into all these moderation in religion. Of course, terrorism is forbidden in Islam. It's a given. And the fact that we have to answer for every terrorist makes us quite upset. We don't expect other people to answer for people who kill in the name of their religion. But nevertheless, we still answer. And so, yes, we don't believe anyone has the right to kill anyone for any reason unless it's in a court of law and there's a death penalty. You can't just go in there and kill people. Okay, even in war, there's very strict rules of how to behave in a war. Just as we have the Geneva Convention, Islam had much higher standards before the Geneva Convention under the Prophet Muhammad. Do all Muslims follow that throughout history? No, Muslims are not perfect. They don't uphold their religion in a perfect way, just as other religions have done so in the past as well. Okay. So, gender equity, it's very important to understand Muslim women and men have the same spiritual rights in Islam. We have the same spiritual nature. We complete each other. Men and women have roles in society. Sometimes those roles change. But the basic role is that the man is the breadwinner and the woman is supposed to take care of children if she has them. She doesn't have to cook and clean. That's not her role. She does so out of the love of her family. Yes, I love being a housewife. I love to get up and take care of my family. I love making sure my home is in a nice order. That's this who I am. I also do other things outside the home. I give lectures. I've remodeled homes. I used to flip homes. But I can live the way that I choose to live. And I feel that every single thing that I do for my family is a reward from God. And I am very proud to say that. Feminism today has become kind of ridiculous, makes women who stay home feel like they're not, worthy. It's a job. It's a very important job, and raising a second part of society. I mean, children are the future of society. If they're not raised by their mothers, I don't expect a daycare or a nurse or someone to take care of my kids. It's my kids. Okay. I've taught my daughters to get educations, get jobs, but when they have children, they stay home until their children are older and they can go off to school during the day. So it's very important. We have many, many rights. There's a whole PowerPoint that I'm going to do in the coming months, weeks on women in Islam. So I won't get into these because it's a whole PowerPoint. If you want to come back and listen to that, it's about women and the rights. Okay, relations with other. We have mercy to all creation, respect for human dignity, brotherhood, unbiased justice, peaceful coexistence. Again, these are basic teachings of Islam. Do all Muslims uphold them? No. But these are the teachings of Islam. There's nothing that anyone can say otherwise. I can show you many verses that teach all of this. In the Quran, it says, "O humankind, we have created you from a male and a female and made you into races and tribes for you to get to know each other." So the main problem here is that people think that we're meant to fight. No, God created us different to get to know each other. And then he said, "The most noble of you are the most conscientious." And so God is all aware of everything that we do, and he knows. So we are judged by how righteous, not self righteous, but how righteous or pious we are, not by whether we're a woman or a man or whether we're from certain tribes or races. So, these are very important concepts in Islam because if God wanted to, in the next chapter, it says he could have made us all one people. He could have, if God would have made you a single nation, but the intent is to test you. So we're tested by the different races we have, the different ideologies. These are all tests. How would you know about life if there was no death? How would you know that you're white if there wasn't someone who was black? How would you know you're a Muslim if there wasn't a Jew or a Christian? You have to have these different differences for you to understand and to be tested and choose certain paths. And make certain choices. No one can just be the same. Plus, you'd be so bored. You'd never travel anywhere in the world if everyone was the same. Why would you go to Mexico and eat Mexican food and, go to Cancun and enjoy whatever culture they have there? If everyone was the same, why would you travel to Japan? Why would you? Everyone's the same culture, religion, ethnicity, the same look. Life would be really boring. I wouldn't even be here giving you a lecture today, right? So here's Islam and Judaism. We have plenty about Moses in the Quran. One of my favorite chapters in the Quran is actually about Joseph. Very beautiful chapter. In Arabic, it's called Yusuf. But Moses and Pharaoh are the two most mentioned beings in the Quran, more than Muhammad. Muhammad's only mentioned 4 times, but Moses is mentioned way more. So is Jesus. Jesus is probably mentioned like 25 times. And so here are some verses from that. You can read them. And then Christianity, lots about Mary and Jesus and so on. And Muslims don't believe Jesus was the Son of God, but they do believe him as a very righteous prophet who was the Messiah the tribes of Israel were awaiting. So we do believe that. And there will be no other Messiah. And Muslims believe he will come again towards the end of time and destroy the Antichrist. So there's that whole sci-fi scenario. I always call it the sci-fi scenario because people assume that religion mimics sci-fi, while in fact sci-fi is much newer than religion. Religion has had books for at least 2,000 years, and many times scriptwriters read religious text and they take ideas from them. So we do have that scenario. Okay, so these are similar. And again, when people say that Muslims are supposed to kill Jews and Jews and Christians, I once walked into a church and I was supposed to give a lecture, and as I was walking in, this is probably 2003, the guy in the church was talking to the minister. He said, "I heard today on the radio that Muslims are supposed to kill all Jews and Christians, and that's really scary." And the minister looked at me and he saw me walk in. He's like, "Well, Maysa's here to answer that." So I got up on stage and I said to him, "You know, if that's true, I'm a very devout Muslim. You should probably run." And he got like worried. And I was like, "I'm kidding. I mean, think of it. How ridiculous is that? There was probably 1.2 billion at that time. And Muslims could have destroyed all Christians and Jews in the Middle East, and they still exist. And all Hindus in India, and they still exist. And they ruled those lands for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's not what Islam teaches. So this is a verse from the Quran about that. And of course, Muslims can marry a Jewish or a Christian woman, believe it or not. A man, not a woman. A woman cannot marry a Christian or a Jewish man because the religion of the children comes from the father. Okay. So, that's pretty much the end of my lecture, and I want to leave some time for answers for questions. I know I've gone over time, maybe. I'm not sure.
That's
So
all
if you have
right.
any questions?
Couple questions, that would be great. Do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can see
Sure.
the audience?
Yes. Let's see the audience. Yeah.
There we are.
Hi.
So there were a couple of um, questions from Jonathan early in your talk. He asks, "What is ISIS and how is it related to Islam?"
Mhm.
That was one question. And could you
Okay.
explain Sunni and Shia?
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
So, ISIS is one of many groups that emerged in the Middle East from the different wars that have occurred in those areas. And when there's wars, there's vacuums and there's politics. And I mean, I'm from originally from Syria, and I used to visit Syria every summer. And I'm very, very well aware of the politics of Syria. And during the revolution in Syria, they're trying to overthrow their government in 2011. It started, there was no ISIS, there was nothing like that. And the government was starting to lose in the eyes of the media. And so I believe, and this is just my personal opinion, and many news agencies have recorded what I'm saying today, but you can look them up, even CNN and many other news agencies. But after a while, when the Alawites of Syria, who are the minority who rule the majority Sunni population, Alawites in Syria, Bashar and his family, they're not Muslim. They're a different group of religious or non religious sect. And so when they started losing the eyes of the public because they were killing their own protesters, slowly they formed this whole ISIS thing. And believe it or not, if you ask Syrians who are in Syria, who are on the ground, many of the members of ISIS were former, um, what do you call those people? Secret Service. And the Secret Service of Syria is amazing. It's like the KGB of Russia. I mean, I used to go there. My grandma lived right next to the president's house. As soon as I entered into my grandma's house, they know me. They know who I am. They know everything about me. They ask you where you're going because you live right next to the president. And they're just very much in tune with their population. They have spies everywhere. Even the garbage man is a spy. So they put these groups and gave the option to the Western community, either you support me or you get this Islamic State. And the true people of Syria that wanted to overthrow their government was simply people who wanted democracy. They didn't want an Islamic State. Muslims in Syria have never had any kind of problem with the Christians or even the Jews of Syria. There was a large population of Jews that lived in Syria. My husband went to medical school with many Jewish students, and they never had issues with different religions. My great grandma lived in the Christian part of Syria. She got along with everyone. But they kind of said, we're going to sow the divisions. We're going to show you this group who is the other option if I fall. So if I leave, this is what you're going to get. And it grew from there. And eventually the opposition just fell apart. And now Syria is, a big mess. And ISIS has nothing to do with Muslims. Really, no Islamic scholar or real state, real country supports ISIS in any way. It's not a representation of Muslims. And if anything, there's about 5 to 10,000 people they claim are related to ISIS. The government of the United States and all of the European governments, with all their might and power, were not able to get rid of these bandits. Think about it. They were able to get rid of Saddam Hussein in one day and Libya in one day. But these bandits have survived all this time. War is money, and selling weapons is a big industry. So keep in mind those kind of thoughts when you think about who's ISIS. They tried to start another group called the Khorasan group, but that didn't work very well. And then there's Al Qaeda. They kind of disappeared too. I just think it's kind of interesting. That's all. So they're not related to Islam. I mean, nobody supports them. If anything, they make Islam look really bad. And it's like someone gave them a playbook of every stereotype about Muslims, and they're just upholding it. It's really laughable. There's all these parodies and jokes about them in Syria and from people who are living there on the ground. And many people have lost their lives in this war. There's probably 500,000 people in jail. My friend lost her brother. He was shot by the government. He was in those Caesar pictures that you can look online. That's how she found out. She looked through the pictures and she saw her brother. And she lives here in the U.S. There was a student who was here we were friends with. He went back to Syria to visit his family, and he was shot by the government because he had something on Facebook. So, as long as you don't write about them or talk about them, you're in good shape. But if you open up your mouth about politics, you don't get canceled. You get canceled, like completely. And then the Sunni Shia division. Really, that started as more of a political division, maybe 500 years after the Prophet's death. And then slowly it turned into more of a religious division. And then people found it as an opportunity to sell weapons. And then you had the Iran Contra affair. So people didn't hate each other, but governments did. So remember, in the Middle East, most Muslim countries have dictatorships. If they fight with one another or hate another nation, doesn't mean all the people who live there hate them too. They don't get to choose their president. Saudi Arabians don't choose their president. In Qatar, they don't choose their president. In Syria, the same way. Jordan, the same way. Okay, so the people don't always represent the government and vice versa. So Sunnis and Shias really don't have animosity except through the governments. So when Hezbollah supports Bashar al Assad against his own people, then yes, there's an animosity towards Hezbollah, but not every single Shia person, but anyone who supports that group. And you can go from there. So it's really a political division at first, but now it's more of a religious division. And there are religious differences. We do generally believe in the same thing, but they have different views on certain things. And they believe that leadership comes from the prophet's line of bloodline, while Sunni Islam teaches that leadership comes from elections. So we elect our leader. And that's how the prophet believed after he died. He wanted people to elect the next leader. So Abu Bakr was elected. Even though he hinted he wanted Abu Bakr, he never said it. He never said, I want him to be the next leader. He hinted, but he let the people elect because he didn't want it to become a precedent where people would just elect, what the leader would elect the next leader. And it did eventually. I mean, they had kingdoms, and kings have their sons. But that's not how Islam teaches. And that's why when people tell me Saudi Arabia is an Islamic state, no, we don't have kingdoms in Islamic states. And the king doesn't get to live in a lavish palace anyway and get away with all the anything that they do, and while the people have to suffer. It's just mind-boggling how people can relate every little negative thing to Islam and every positive thing to something else. Well, in fact, colonialism is the reason why so many Muslim countries are messed up. They were doing pretty well until that. And they lost. I mean, I'll admit, Muslims lost to the British and the French and all them because they didn't practice their religion anymore. They became very wealthy, very powerful, and they just forgot about faith. And that happens to all civilizations. When they become very strong and powerful, they start to fall from the inside. Unfortunately, I see that coming into our country. I hope it doesn't. I love the United States, and I would hate for the country I live in, where my children are going to live forever, to also fail.
Yeah.
So I hope not.
Maysa, we do have a question. It was to me, but I'm going to ask out loud. The copyright on the slides
Hmm.
said ING, and
Yeah.
what does that stand for? What is that
It's called
organization?
Islamic Networking Group. You can look it up. It's based in California, and it's been around for quite a while. And it's a group of Muslims and even non-Muslims who have joined the board, where they produce these slides to give to people like myself to present at schools and churches and synagogues, and it's also a suitable slide to show to public schools for their education on social studies or world religions or whatever other. So we present these slides in schools as well, and so they've been thought through and done in a way that's not proselytizing. It's more educational, informational. It's always up to the speaker of how he speaks. And of course, when I speak to public schools, I do a very, I tone down some things because it's a public school. You are not a public school. So that's the group. You can look it up. It's called ing.org.
Thank
So
you so
it's been
much.
around. Hmm.
And everyone, I wanted to let you know that Maysa's coming back next week
Hmm.
for the topic of role of women in Islam. So we are looking forward to that. And I believe if we don't have any questions, oh, we do have one more question here.
Okay.
How did the Sufis fit into the theology?
Oh, it depends on which Sufis you're talking about. Goofy Sufis or regular Sufis? We call them goofy Sufis. So, again, my parents are from Syria, and every time I used to go, we have a very strong tradition of Sufism in our family. And my aunt is a very big teacher in the Sufi tradition. And in Syria, the Sufi traditions are very strong amongst women. And they have their own society, their own group. All these educated doctors and lawyers and so on. They're like the leader of the religious Sufi groups. And then they have their students, and then their students, and they're all color coded in what color scarves they wear. It's kind of it's crazy. It works. Um, and they're very much into spirituality and focusing on improving character of that person. So, for instance, they'll send an educated woman to the group that is for all the highly educated college students, and she teaches them how to be good students, how to do good in their societies, and so on. And then they'll send someone who's like more of a housewife to the villages and teach them how to be a better wife, a better mother, a better whatever suits their needs, and teaches them spirituality. So Sufism is, it's not comparable to Kabbalah, really. It's a little different. Maybe like the Jesuits in Christianity, how they have like a group and a leader they follow and so on. But there's goofy Sufis who don't pray or fast or do anything. They just sing and twirl and try to be like hippies. That's not Sufism. That's not true Sufism. That's like another form. If you leave any of the five tenets of Islam or the beliefs, then you're not even Muslim. So you can call yourself whatever you want, but you're not Muslim. And there's other Muslim sects that claim to be Muslim, like Ahmadiyyas and Ismailis and all these, and they're all not considered mainstream Islam at all. They're a different sect, a different group. They're free to worship what they want and how they want, but they don't really they don't count as part of the Muslim population, and they don't make up a big population either. Even if there's 100,000 or 200,000, we have 1.8 billion, so they don't make up a large population. But Sufism is a spiritual path that many Muslims follow. As long as they don't break any of the tenets, what they're doing is fine. And they sing a lot. They like to sing. We used to get together and sing Islamic songs, and we don't sing in the mosques because people have different views on singing. But the Quran itself is very melodic, so when you hear it, it sounds like music. And if anybody wants to hear Quran on YouTube, there's Hisham Al Arabi, and he has a few chapters, and he labels them as heaven. Be heaven. If you hear them, you literally are like in a different world. I just found him. I go to bed listening to him sometimes, but he's very very good.
We have one more comment question, and then we will have to end for today. But please come back next week
I will.
to see everyone. And so Diane would like to know, did you say Shidai, and do you believe in science?
Science?
Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke about science earlier in my lecture. Muslims were one of the people, were the pioneers in science. We, of course, discovered the numeral system. You have the Arabic numerals, right? We were pioneers in astronomy, in chemistry, in botany. Um, Many of the great scientists in the past were even Muslims. If you go back and look up what's his name, uh, God, all their names, anything with an AL in front of it is from a Muslim. Just algebra, um, algorithmy, alchemia, all these things, and we're from Muslim scientists. So Islam is really much a pioneer in that. Now, people later on in different civilizations took that information and improved on it. Yes, definitely. All of societies share in improving what we have today. But when Christianity was in the Dark Ages, Muslims were being encouraged to study science and to promote science and to learn more about it. They didn't come up with the idea that God wasn't involved until much later. Even many Christians and Jews, they all believed God was involved in the scientific findings. Much later, for people who didn't want to believe in God anymore, they started to add this whole ungodly thing. But Muslims have never been at odds with science. Even the Quran has many scientific miracles that are discovered today, like the development of an embryo. It's described very well in the Quran. The two seas in the ocean that have a barrier between them is described very well. So we definitely believe in science, yes. But again, we don't believe in evolution, and that's not even proven. It's a theory, and so evolution is different. We don't come from apes, and that is a major belief in Islam. You cannot say we came from apes as a Muslim because God says very clearly we were created from Adam and Eve, and they were made of clay. And when we die, we turn back to dirt and dust if you let people dissolve in the ground. And Muslims bury their dead very similar to Jews. We wrap them and shroud them and put them in the ground very quickly right after their death as an honor to them. And we let them dissolve back into the ground. We don't embalm bodies. Okay.
Well, thank you
So
so much. We
my next
really,
lecture on women will really answer questions about headscarves, women's rights, um, women leaders, and so on. So please join. It'll answer all your questions on that. Okay.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today.
Thank you for
And we
listening.
look forward to your next presentation next week. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you for all being here. Okay. Goodbye.
Bye bye.